This video is brought to you by the Logitech Lightspeed Wireless range of keyboards, mice and headsets, the benchmark in wireless gaming performance.
Now, if you're anything like me, maybe you've also become hooked on Valheim, an indie survival and crafting game that has just entered early access on Steam. This game's been lighting up the charts since its release, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the gameplay and tech behind the game, so I thought it would be a great idea to make an optimization video for the game so that you and the audience know what settings to use and what to look out for on mid-range PCs like those equipped with a GTX 1060. But before I get into the optimized settings and stuff you should look out for, let me first tell you a bit about what Valheim is for those who don't know. In Valheim, you take the role of a custom character, Viking hero, exploring the lands between here and the afterlife. You are thrust onto this virgin earth with only two goals really, to survive and to topple the Forsaken, giant beasts that are equivalent to this game's boss fights. As you explore the world, you engage in survival mechanics like building shelters, gathering resources, and challenging harder enemies to find rarer things. You can then upgrade gear and also get access to new weapon and building plans. While playing Valheim, I had that same little tingle in the back of my head that I had when I first played Terraria back in 2011, and that is a good thing. The difference here though is that you have this kind of unique world aesthetic and technical makeup. Valheim is leveraging the Unity engine to generate its procedurally seeded worlds and drive its graphical presentation. So there are extremely modern graphical flourishes, like lit and shadowed volumetric fog, which is really visible at nighttime as your lit torches diffuse in the fog around them, or at daybreak and at sundown as thick light beams are visibly crossing in between the game's trees. The game also uses some interesting particle effects that are shaded and shadowed, so each and every explosion of dust catches the light of the area around it and has shadows cast through them. That very modern tech is then mixed with some purposefully anachronistic graphical elements, like how nearly all the game's textures lack texture filtering, so you can see individual pixels making up their artwork, which gives the game a kind of old PS1 or software rendered level of texture detail. That while the game's models and environments have the geometric complexity almost like an early Xbox 360 title. So trees are suitably not round, and smaller doodads around your constructed settlement look almost like something out of Morrowind or Skyrim. I've mentioned these games rather purposefully, as while the overall game idea was giving me Terraria deja vu, the moment-to-moment gameplay and environmental feel reminded me more of something like Oblivion, where you stroll around, stumble on rolling clearings, investigate dark and dense wood, or go into dungeons and find rare objects while fighting skeletons. It's surprisingly engaging on a visual level given how simplistic the assets and texturing can really be. As I say that though, it's not as if the game's going to be straightforward to run, as it's early access and all the modern graphical effects like the volumetric lighting and real-time shadow maps make the game a bit heavy. So here is where I'll get into some straightforward graphical optimizations that I think every user should probably take advantage of. The first and most important is to not use the in-game VSync in the menu settings. Rather, I first recommend most users start the game and close it, and then force the game into a real exclusive full screen mode. This is done by right-clicking the game on Steam, going to Properties, and then typing -window-mode space exclusive into the launch game options. After this is done, then I recommend going to your graphics control panel and setting up the game profile to use fast VSync. On Nvidia GPUs, you add the game profile in the list after you've already started the game, and scroll down to the VSync option there and select fast and hit apply. On AMD, this is done by going to the game's profile in the control app from your desktop as you see here, and then forcing the enhanced VSync option. The reason why you want to do this is because the game's default VSync implementation depresses performance and causes drops that don't really have to do much with your real GPU performance. Like take this view here in my house where I have two lit fires with particles that are actually physicalized and get physically stopped by the roof. It's a pretty neat graphical effect. But with the game's standard VSync, the performance is rather poor here, if you notice. With fast VSync, the unlocked performance above the refresh rate is soaring, with no slowdown on screen. So definitely do not use the in-game VSync and leverage fast sync instead. For making optimized settings, I've loaded up the GTX 1060 here with the goal of reaching 1080p at 60 FPS with the least amount of visual sacrifices where they really matter the most. The first settings to tweak are in post-processing with depth of field. This adds an ever-constant out-of-focus haze to distant objects based upon where your screen is centered. Here I recommend turning it off for optimized settings as it can increase performance by around or more than 7%. I recommend turning off chromatic aberration as well here, not because it's performance intensive, but because at a 1080p resolution, this effect will be rather overbearing and we will want to keep the image quality as clean as reasonably possible. After this, there are some other good settings tweaks to be had, like with the shadow quality setting. Here, this setting reduces the resolution of shadows and the rendering distance. Going from high to medium increases performance by nearly 15% and high to low by nearly 21%. Here I find the reduction in quality to medium to be a good middle ground for optimized settings and achieving 60 FPS on this GPU. After this, another easy tweak comes from the particle lighting option, which increases the realism of how particles can be lit. Going from high to medium increases performance by around 5% and to low around 8%. Here I recommend medium as the difference is not too great and it is awesome for optimized settings. After this, there are a whole bunch of effects where I think they should not be touched really at all, as turning them off or reducing their quality is not worth the visual sacrifice. Bloom, for example, gives this game its fantastical look and its brightness. It also costs next to nothing and should be left on. SSAO, or Screen Space Ambient Occlusion as it is known, is necessary to make this game's shadowed areas look rather normal. Otherwise, without it, it looks rather odd. So I recommend leaving it on even if it can increase performance by nearly 6% by turning it off. Same with soft particles. Soft particles off makes particles look odd when they intersect with other game objects, so the campfire here is colored all wrong and looks rather broken in comparison to how it looks when soft particles are on. So I recommend leaving soft particles on even though it can save 6% performance here as you see. In that same sense, I also recommend leaving vegetation quality at its highest of high, as even the highest settings of this game cause grasses and bushes to load surprisingly close to the camera, so tweaking it down to medium or low will overly negatively affect the game's visuals. Reducing vegetation to medium does not help performance too much anyway, and low gets rid of all the vegetation together, so it's really only meant for very old or slow GPUs. So high vegetation is optimized. This is also true for the usage of tessellation, where the game without the tessellation option turned on leaves the ground extremely flat and full of hard edges, and I do not recommend it to be turned off even if it can increase performance by around 7%. The last two settings are less clear cut. The first is motion blur. It is purely a subjective thing. This game uses a per object motion blur, so that means character animations like me thrusting my knife here can look a good deal smoother with motion blur on. But at the same time, when a lot of motion blur is on screen, like when I spin the camera, it can cost around 3 to 4% of your performance. I like the way it looks, but for general optimized settings, I will recommend to turn it off. The most important tweak to make though for performance is found in the level of detail setting. This decreases the visibility range of objects like rocks at a distance, so they render the closer you get to them. This decision is a hard one, as very high looks good, but honestly, in many views this can be really expensive, and the GTX 1060 is right there on the edge with its performance, so I recommend the high level of detail setting to ensure that 60 FPS is, well, assured and not rocky. In the end, my optimized settings look like this. Some cuts to shadows, particle lighting, and a lot of the post-processing options are off, as well as a necessary cut to level of detail. In total, in one scene, these optimized settings can save up to 44% of the game's performance over the settings put to their max. So quite a nice bit of savings, with the GTX 1060 here being put comfortably above 60 FPS. When testing out these settings and running through the game world on the GTX 1060 and RX 580, we can see that the GTX 1060 manages a healthy lead over 60 FPS, which has been secured by these optimized settings. The RX 580 comparatively lags behind in overall performance, with the 1060 performing on average 22% faster than the 580, and that 580 is often on the edge or below 60 FPS. This test between these GPUs also shows how this game, at the moment in early access, looks to suffer from a stuttering problems of sorts when you traverse the terrain, as both GPUs here, without VSync on, show semi-periodic dips in the frame time graph and larger ones at the exact same moments almost. With VSync on, these smaller periodic dips would manifest as small stutters, and the larger ones would look like full-on split-second pauses almost. So fear not if this happens on your PC at the moment while playing Valheim in early access, as I believe this is a game issue of performance that the developers can look at and fix over time. This is an early access title after all. In the end though, I think my optimized settings do a great job of securing performance on the GTX 1060, and the game looks much the same. This is important, as the game, I think, looks surprisingly nice. In making these optimized settings, we also found out that this game suffers from a minor stuttering problem, which I hope developers can watch this video and then address as the title develops further in early access, and I really look forward to it. But that is enough from me for now. If you found this video and my optimized settings here useful, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, then hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to check out this video in the highest quality available, support Digital Foundry on Patreon to get years worth of Digital Foundry content available in high quality for download. If you want to talk to me about Valheim, write a comment below or follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. As always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.
A gaming icon evolved. Logitech's renowned G502 mouse joins the ranks of the world's most advanced gaming mice with the release of the G502 Lightspeed, featuring ultra-fast wireless connectivity and reliability with performance trusted in competition by esports pros. Featuring the next generation Hero 25K sensor and PowerPlay compatibility, this is the ultimate rendition of the celebrated G502 mouse.